All right, ready for a deep dive into a topic that's seriously fascinating? We're talking about asexuality and aromanticism, and we're lucky enough to be diving into Ace Voices by Eris Young.
Yeah, this book is really something.
It really is. For anyone who's like, okay, wait, remind me again. We're basically talking about asexuality as like a lack of sexual attraction and
Right.
aromanticism as a lack of romantic attraction. But, and this is key,
Huge.
it's not like this simple on-off switch, right? It's
Yeah.
a whole spectrum of experiences.
Totally. And Jung does a great job of, really emphasizing that diversity of experience within asexuality and aromanticism.
Yes, like you can be asexual and still enjoy sex in certain contexts, or be aromantic and still crave deep, committed relationships.
Exactly. And that's actually a perfect segue into something Jung talks about, which is the power of language.
Oh, tell me more about that.
So many people in the book talk about how finding the right words like asexual, demisexual, gray romantic was like this huge aha moment.
Right, like finally, there's a name for this thing I've been feeling.
Exactly. It's validating. It helps you connect with others who get it. And it really challenges this idea that there's only one right way to experience attraction in relationship.
And Jung even introduces terms I'd never even heard before, like egosexual, which is
Yeah.
like someone who enjoys sexual content but doesn't want to personally participate.
Right. Or queer platonic, which are relationships that are super intimate and committed, but not romantic in the traditional sense.
See, this is what I love about this book. It's like, it's not just about defining asexuality and aromanticism. It's about expanding our whole understanding of what relationships can even look like.
Totally. It makes you question, like, why do we feel the need to put relationships into these neat little boxes anyway?
Right. And what happens when we start breaking out of those boxes? I'm thinking, even for people who don't identify as a spec, this book could be a total game changer in terms of how we think about connection and intimacy.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that there are so many valid ways to experience love and connection, and that's something worth celebrating.
Yeah.
And one thing Jung talks about that really stuck with me,
What's that?
it's this idea of amatonormativity. Like, it's basically this underlying assumption.
Okay, hold up. Amatonormativity, break that down for me.
Basically, it's like this idea that everyone wants romantic relationships,
Duh.
that they're the most important thing ever,
Right.
and that, like, finding the one is the ultimate goal, you know?
Oh, I know. It's like that pressure to be coupled up, especially around Valentine's Day.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And in the book, so many people talk about how this pressure makes them feel,
Like suffocated almost.
yeah, like there's this one story about a woman who kept losing her close friends once they got into relationships.
Tell me about it. It's like you get bumped down the priority list.
Exactly. Like there's this unspoken hierarchy with romantic relationships at the top.
And everything else is like less important.
Right. And for people who are a spec, that can be so isolating.
Right, because it's like you're constantly being told you're missing out, even if you're perfectly happy.
And it's not just society, right?
Oh, for sure.
It's families, too, like parents who are obsessed with grandkids and weddings.
Oh my gosh, yeah. There's this part in the book where someone talks about their parents basically saying being single is pointless.
Yeah, it's like your worth is tied to finding a partner, which is just so messed up.
Totally. And it's like, what about all the other amazing things you can do with your life?
Exactly. And it's even more intense in some religious communities where marriage and family are like sacred duties.
There's this story about a woman from a Mennonite community.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
And she's constantly getting pressured to find a husband. Like, people even sign her up to help with kids.
Oh, wow.
So she can get some, quote, practice for motherhood.
It's wild how these expectations can make it so hard for people to just be themselves.
But here's the cool thing. Young doesn't just point out the problems. She offers some solutions.
Oh, totally. Like those alternative relationship models she talks about.
Yeah, like remember those queer platonic relationships we talked about?
Oh, right. Where it's like more than friendship, but not exactly romantic either.
It's like you get to define what that connection means for you,
Exactly. And then there's Boston marriages,
which historically were partnerships between women.
often for practical reasons, like financial independence.
Right, and they weren't expected to get married or have kids necessarily.
And it's so cool to see how these alternative models are becoming more, well, not mainstream, but more talked about.
Definitely. It's like we're starting to realize there's not just one right way to do relationships.
And that's good news for everyone, not just people who are a spec.
Totally. Like, we can all benefit from expanding our ideas about love and connection. It's interesting. We're talking about all these different ways to experience relationships, but what about sex? Because I feel like there's this assumption that if you're asexual, you just like hate sex.
Right. And Ace Voices really tackles that head on.
Oh, good, because it's something I've definitely wondered about.
Like, Young makes it so clear that being asexual doesn't automatically equal being sex repulsed.
Which means, sorry to interrupt.
No, you're good. It just means, like, having a strong aversion to sex.
Gotcha.
But she also talks about how some asexual people are sex favorable.
So they enjoy it, but maybe under certain conditions.
Exactly. It's all about what feels right for the individual.
Yeah.
And there's a whole spectrum in between those two ends.
That makes a lot more sense because I remember this one story in the book. I think it was about someone who described sex as like a negotiated act in their relationship.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one, too.
Yeah.
It wasn't something they personally desired,
Right.
but they were open to it because it was important to their partner.
Which, I mean, talk about communication being key,
Yeah.
right? Like in any relationship, but especially when you're navigating these different experiences and preferences around sex.
Totally. And, Young shares a lot of stories about people navigating those exact conversations.
Oh, I bet. It's got to be a delicate balance.
It is. But the ones who prioritize that open communication, they end up having such stronger, more fulfilling relationships.
Makes sense. So it's less about the label of asexual or not asexual and more about just being honest with yourself and your partner.
Exactly. It's about creating that space where everyone feels safe and respected.
Which, honestly, that's a good takeaway for anyone around.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Thinking about Ace Voices now, what really strikes me is how much it celebrates the joy of being a spec.
Oh, tell me more about that.
It's like the book goes beyond just defining terms and challenges. It dives into that feeling of truly living authentically and how awesome that can be.
There was this one quote that really got me. I was talking about how someone had to unlearn that their worth was tied to finding a partner.
Yes. So powerful. And I love the one about being a single crazy cat lady. Like, owning it.
It's like, finally, we can ditch those societal scripts and just define happiness on our own terms.
And you know what's cool? Embracing your aspec identity can actually make your other relationships even stronger.
Really? How so?
Like, a lot of people in the book talked about how once they let go of those expectations around romantic relationships, they could focus on building deeper, more authentic connections with friends and family.
So it's like by embracing who they truly are, they were able to create these incredibly rich and meaningful relationships, even if they weren't the traditional romantic kind.
Exactly. It's a beautiful thing. And Young leaves us with this thought-provoking idea about intersectionality.
Oh, right. Like how asexuality intersects with race and gender identity and all these other parts of who we are.
Exactly. Like, she talks about how, for Black asexual people, it could be even more complex because of all these stereotypes around Black sexuality.
Right. It's never just one thing.
And then there's the connection with neurodiversity, too.
Which makes sense if we're already talking about challenging norms.
Totally. So Ace Voices really opens up this whole conversation about identity and connection. And it leaves you with this feeling of like, wow, there's still so much to learn and understand.
Absolutely. It's definitely a must read for, well, anyone really who's interested in exploring these ideas and challenging their own assumptions.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, this has been such a fascinating deep dive. Thanks to everyone for sending in your questions, and a huge thank you to you for sharing your insights.
My pleasure. Always happy to geek out about this stuff.
We'll be back next time with another deep dive into the big questions and fascinating ideas shaping our world. Until then, keep those book recommendations coming.